Okay, I think we'll get started. People have had about an hour to get here already, so we should be in good shape. Glad all of you could come tonight, and welcome Teresa and celebrate with her. I'll do a short introduction, and then I'll turn it over to Teresa. Teresa MacBain is Executive Director of the Clergy Project, which is a safe haven for active and former clergy who do not hold supernatural beliefs. The Clergy Project is working to expand its reach by providing tangible assistance to transitioning clergy by way of a financial grant and reemployment aid. Teresa has recently come out as a non-theist at the American Atheist Convention in Washington, D.C. She has been featured in the Thinking Atheist podcast, the Richard Dawkins website, and numerous other free thought publications. Teresa recently spoke at the Northwest Free Thought Conference alongside Richard Dawkins of the Richard Dawkins Foundation and Jerry DeWitt, fellow Clergy Project graduate and director of Recovering from Religion. Teresa served as a senior pastor at the United Methodist Church for the past 6 years and as a worship leader for 8 years prior to her term as a pastor. She also taught in a private Christian school in Alabama and Florida for 6 years. So we'll welcome Teresa. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. It's let us know about the levels. The magic man over here will take care of everything. But thank you, Reba, for inviting me, and thank you guys for all coming out, and especially thank you for cake. I love cake. Cake loves me. That makes us all very happy, right? So I've got you sugared up. I've got you happy because you've got your cake. And if you will allow me for just a little bit, I'd like to share my story. As Reba said, I came out at the American Atheist Convention, which was 10 weeks ago. It seems like it's been much longer than that, but it hasn't. I'm just a little baby. So you guys be kind, be gracious to me because I'm just learning to walk. I've titled my talk From the Edge of Faith to the Embrace of Reason. I struggled with it, and a friend actually shared this title with me as she and I were talking. And she said, you know, it really describes where you've been and who you are. You were there so immersed in your faith, and it took reason to bring you out. And I'm sure that many of you could say the same things about your own faith and about your own journey. You may be wondering what a former Methodist pastor can say to you. Now, some of you can identify because you came out of a religious setting. You may see yourself in my story in many places, and that's great. I think we all share a lot of that as we come through the process and into the embrace of reason. Some of you may have come up and didn't have any religious upbringing or very little at all, which is fine as well. I actually am envious of you a little bit. But I think by sharing my story, even though it's very religiously centered, I think it can help us to kind of bridge a gap between the two. So that when you have a friend maybe who is coming out or has come out and has come out of a religious doctrine or faith or community, you will understand a little bit more about what it takes and what they're going through. You see, I think that we can do anything we want to. We can change the world as long as we work together. Just my own 2 cents I'll throw in there. My story begins just like your story begins. A man and a woman had a little baby. See that cute little girl right there? That was I think it was Easter because I have on a pink dress with a white jacket. That's usually when I got to wear the pink dress and the white jacket. My brother there, we're at my grandmother's after church. Everybody went to church. After church on Easter, everybody went to my grandmother's, and everybody ate fried chicken and mashed potatoes and gravy and all the good Southern food that makes you so healthy, right? Yeah. I was raised in church. My father was actually a Baptist pastor. He's retired now. And we were in the northeast section of Alabama, way up there near the mountains, very rural, very Southern, very conservative. The church is now classified Southern Baptist, but when I was growing up, I don't think we were classified. I think we were just kind of out there. We're real fundamental. I couldn't wear pants. I couldn't go swimming with boys. It was called mixed bathing. Couldn't watch TV. We didn't even own a TV. No rock and roll, which I rebelled. I have to admit, I did rebel. No makeup. Couldn't cut my hair except those little, any of you ever had those haircuts where your mom just cuts straight across The bangs, yeah. Long, dark, black hair down to here and straight bangs. And you can see it right there, actually. There's a good picture of it. But unlike most pastors' kids, they go one of two ways. You have the wild child, and then you have the one that wants to be just like the pastor, like Daddy when she grows up. Well, that was me. I was the good girl. I wanted to do everything Dad wanted to do. I was in church from the week after I was born on Friday, not that Sunday, but the next Sunday I was in church and really never missed except for maybe 4 or 5 times in my entire life. Being Baptist meant we were in church on Sunday morning for Sunday school and worship, Sunday evening for discipleship training, which is where they taught you how to be a good Baptist, and Sunday worship. Monday night we went to visitation, which is when we would come and get together and get our little Bibles and go knock on your doors and convince you that you needed to become a Christian and become a Baptist. And then Wednesday night again we had another worship service. So my life was filled with Christian teaching and Christian doctrine, and I loved every minute of it. I couldn't get enough of it. I was so completely dedicated. Now, you may not believe this. I had a little red Gideon's Bible. Now, please don't hurt me or throw rocks that I brought a Bible, okay? I had this little Bible. These folks called Gideons, I'm sure you know of them because they put Bibles in the hotel rooms. They came to our church and talked one Sunday night, and after church, lo and behold, I got my own Bible. I was probably no bigger than this little girl right here, maybe 4. And I got my own little Bible, my treasured possession. This isn't the exact one because the one I had, I carried it with me in my back pocket everywhere I went. Every time I had a moment to myself, I had it open, and I was reading it, and I was memorizing verses so that I could be a better Christian. Once I got to school, I still carried it with me. I didn't care if people picked on me. I was being persecuted for the sake of the Lord. And that was the thing you had to do if you wanted to be a true believer. And if you sat close enough to me and I knew you didn't go to church, you might just get a little bit of preaching from a little girl too. I mean, I was completely sold out. And you're saying, well, why are you going on about this? Why are you saying this? Well, you ever heard of the no true Scotsman theory? I've heard a lot of it the last 10 weeks. Well, if there ever was a true believer, then I was the true believer from the very beginning. I think that's probably why it took me so long to come out. I studied the scriptures. I read them. My Bible, this one, I pulled up a picture of one that's marked and highlighted and underlined. That ain't nothing. You should have seen mine. It was so marked. Without a television, I had plenty of time to read, and my dad actually encouraged it and praised me for sitting at the table and reading with my highlighters and markers. And I studied, and I kept reading, and then all of a sudden I started to realize, something just doesn't add up. Something's not right. I'm probably mid-teens, probably. I'm kind of getting to that midlife place where you don't remember things exactly. So I can't tell you the age, but mid-teens probably. And I noticed that something doesn't add up. In particular, I'm reading in some of Paul's letters in the book of Corinthians, and he's writing about women, which I happen to have particular interest in because, if you haven't noticed, I am a woman. And he writes in chapter 14, I believe, Cliff can correct me back there if I'm wrong, he writes about women, and he says, okay, women, you need to keep silent in church. That if you've got a question, you just keep your mouth shut till you get home and ask your husband, and he will tell you. Right? You ever read that passage? Look it up, 1 Corinthians 14. Well, I was reading that, and I was like, oh, okay, I can be a good submissive woman, and I will wait, and I will ask, and the good godly men will teach me. Well, I was reading a little later, the next day, chapter 11, same book, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul says, if a woman prays or prophesies in church with her head uncovered, she dishonors her head. So basically what he's saying is if a woman stands up in church, like I am, and she bows her head and says a prayer, or she speaks a word, the word from God, which is prophesy, without a hat on, she dishonors her head, her husband. So I got to thinking, wow, wait a minute. Paul said, keep my mouth shut, wait till I get home, and ask my husband. And then he turns around and he says, okay, you can talk in church, but just make sure you wear a hat. So which one is it? I'm very confused. Remember, I'm mid-teens here, so I go to my dad, and I say to Dad, I share the little little story with him I just shared with you. And I said, which one is it? Which one did Paul really mean? Can I talk in church, or do I have to be quiet and ask my husband when I get married? And he's like, that's a good question. Are you confused? Yes, Dad, I'm very confused. Well, the Scripture teaches us that God is not the author of confusion. So if you're confused, it's not from God, and you need to pray. Well, I believed him. I believed him. What did I take away from this message? I took away these three things. Doubt equals lack of faith equals sin. So this imprinted on my little mid-teen mind this message that has taken me so long to get it out of my head. And even sometimes now, I still kind of feel those twinges of guilt. I mean, it's a hard thing to overcome. Every time coming up, as I would study, as I would read, as I'd be presented with some little fact or some little tidbit that looking back should have turned me around just like that, I know why. It's because every time it was equated with sin. And as a good Christian, I needed to pray. I needed to take that thought captive, as the Bible says again, and bring it under submission to Jesus Christ so that I could be holy and pure and be a good little student and a good teacher and a good sharer of God's Word. So that was my solution. And I don't think my slide's going to pull it up. There it is. My solution is I just need to work harder. If I work harder and I study harder, then I'll know more, I'll mature, and I'll understand. And all these things, I'll look back on them and say, oh, why was I ever confused about that? Well, it didn't really turn out that way. But you know the end of the story. I felt that God was calling me early in my life. If you heard any of the interviews, I think NPR shared that about 6 years old, I felt that God was calling me to be in the ministry in some way. Again, I talked to my dad at 6 years old and told him that when I grew up I wanted to be a preacher just like him. And any of you come out of the Baptist faith? No? Any of you that did know what he said to me? No, you can't do that. Girls aren't allowed. So I started exploring other options. My family was musical. My mother was a beautiful alto singer, piano players, band, guitars. I mean, that was the way that we didn't have a TV. We had to do something. I mean, come on. So I thought that music had to be my calling and explored that for some years. I taught school as Reba shared with you, and eventually I came to the place where I played around with the Scripture enough to where I could be a pastor and be a woman. But that's another part of the story that I'll get to in a minute. So God begins to call, and I begin to feel this, and as I get into my teen years and move on toward college, those things really start to come full circle, and I decide that I need to do something about it, which means that the questions have to stop immediately. I cannot question at all. If it even tries to rear its little head up in the least, I've got to slam the lid down on it, stick it somewhere, anywhere, so it can't be found ever again. Well, obviously it didn't work again because I'm standing here in front of you. I tried to hide them. I tried to pour myself into ministry at first when I was beginning to work as a pastor. It's really hard to find a job as a woman as a pastor. It's just not the most accepted thing, especially in the South. So I spent 4 years in prison ministry. 4 years every Saturday morning, going at 6:30 in the morning to a women's facility and preaching to about 250 women. Now, let me tell you, it was a great experience. I really honed the craft there and got a lot of skills. And I was so proud to do it. Again, I was suffering for the Lord. I was doing God's work. I was so proud of myself. I got involved in nursing home ministry. On any given Sunday, you'd find me 5 or 6 different nursing homes, just going from one to the other, to the other, to the other. The homeless ministry, any place that a lot of times, forgive me for this, but that guys didn't want to do the work, they'd let us women who felt like we were called to be in ministry do the work. Then I discovered a fellow by the name of John Wesley. Now remember, all through this time, the questions are still there. You can't banish them off to Never Never Land. They're still there. I was just trying to deal with them in a way that would at least give me some peace. But all the while, they're still slowly creeping back up on me. So I discovered this fellow named John Wesley. John Wesley said these 2 statements. First of all, though we may not think alike, may we not all love alike. You'd have thought I'd died and gone to heaven. Here is a Christian man who founded a denomination that says, I can think. Gives me permission to think. Another one of his famous statements in the essentials unity and the non-essentials liberty and all things charity, that just kind of hammered it home for me. Okay, I have to maintain these core tenets of the faith, but in everything else, I mean, it's just open season for me. I can question, I can study, I can read, I can do anything I want as long as I hold on to that Apostles' Creed. Wow, I could live with that. Looking back, I realized that this moment is one of those pivotal moments. It was probably the beginning of the end for me, because somebody finally said, hey, doubt equals lack of faith equals sin is wrong. You can think. You can explore those questions. You can explore those doubts. Now, I didn't realize it then. I just thought that understanding those things and delving into those subjects and those topics would just make me, again, that much better of a Christian, that much more mature, and that much better a pastor. So that when you come to me and you ask me a question, or you have two scriptures, I don't have to say to you, well, are you confused? Well, God isn't the author of confusion. Go pray about it. I could give you the answers. Wouldn't that be great if I could actually give people the answers? Didn't really work out, again. So I started looking at my life. Those questions led me to these 4 fatal flaws of faith. Say that 5 times fast. 4 fatal flaws of faith. I started thinking and looking and just exploring my faith. There we go. And the first place that I came to was obvious. It was the Bible. I'd already been dealing with questions about contradictions in the Scripture, looking now at more historical documents and saying, oh, well, maybe those things aren't quite so reliable. I remember the day that I finally realized that the text that King James had transcribed and written into the King James Version 1611, those weren't actually authentic original documents. I was so shocked. I mean, honestly, I'm embarrassed to say it, but I was so shocked. I was so shocked. So as I dealt with those contradictions, I came to the conclusion, after hours and hours of just sitting there and comparing one thing to the other, and this text to a historical document or scientific or archaeological piece, I came to the conclusion, first of all, that the Bible isn't real. The things that are contained there are not based on science. They're not based on history. They're not based on facts, stories, mythologies, those things. So the Bible is not real was my first step. Then I got to thinking about religion. I'd already realized that the sacred text known as the Bible, which is what I grew up as a Christian with, wasn't the answer. It wasn't the life's handbook or in children's church we were taught that the Bible, the word B-I-B-L-E, meant basic instructions before leaving earth. Well, I realized that's not what it is. So I started thinking about religions and thought about, well, I'm a Christian. I was a Baptist because I was raised up in the South in the United States of America. But this person is a Hindu because they've been raised in India. And this person is a Muslim. And this person, you fill in the blank of different religions. And a lot of times it's based upon how you're raised, who your parents are, and what your culture is. And so I kind of threw religion out pretty quickly and said, okay, God is the creator. He designed the universe. He loves us all. He made this creation. So why would he allow these human beings to only have one narrow, thin path to him? All religions have to lead to God. None of them are valid, any more valid than any other. As long as you're sincere and you believe and you practice what I understand now as humanistic values, then, hey, we're all worshiping the same guy. So that I realized the Bible wasn't real, that religion isn't real. This is your favorite, hell. I have been cursed and threatened and even had people say, I can't wait to see you burn. So, yeah, I'm pretty familiar with hell right now. This was the next little piece that fell into place for me. Thinking of how someone who bills themselves as a loving creator, father figure God, could actually create a place where he would say, okay, you're in and you're out. Sorry, you're just going to burn forever. Not just for 5 seconds or 5 minutes or 5 years or 500 years. Forever and forever and forever and ever. I don't know how long that is, but I think it's a pretty long time. So as I tried to wrap my head around that, I thought, wow, I'm a parent and I'm a human being, and according to this God, I am very frail and weak. According to the Bible, God's ways are higher than our ways, and God's thoughts are higher than our thoughts, so I can't even begin to understand how mighty and awesome and wonderful He is. So I'm this weak, frail human being parent, and I have 2 sons. One of them was one of those sons, you know. He knocked on the door, teaching school, by the way. Can you come out? We need to talk about my son. Oh, my goodness. Next day. Can you come out? We need to talk about... Okay, enough already. Never once did I consider taking him out to the back of the school and pouring gasoline on him and lighting him on fire. Never once. I thought of some other stuff, but nothing quite so heinous as that. Hell can't be real. It cannot exist. Not in my scheme of things, and actually not in the reality of anything. Hell cannot exist. I actually have very little tolerance for anybody who says that now, because just think about it as a human being. Why would you want somebody to burn that way? Why would you want somebody to suffer just because they don't think the same way that you think? And enough of that, I'll get off my soapbox. The Bible isn't real. Religion can't be real. Hell isn't real. The next piece for me is this piece called theodicy. Theodicy is simply the doctrine of evil. Where does evil come from? Where did God create it? Why do evil things happen to good people? All those things, you've heard of it before. This statement happens to be my favorite. Epicurus wrote, "Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then He's not omnipotent. Is He able but not willing? Then He is malevolent. Is He both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is He neither able nor willing? Then why call Him God?" I remember the day I read that, and I thought to myself, well, why in the world would I call Him God? It actually, I'm making fun of it, but it was actually a pretty tough day. Because you think about everything that, and I'm 43 years old at the time. I do remember that. 43 years invested in one thought process, invested in one way of life. Even now, 10 weeks out, the day that I stepped down off the stage at the American Atheist Convention and got on the plane and went back home, nothing has ever been the same. And it will not be as long as I'm in that town anyway. Family, friends, you guys are my friends. Facebook is my friend now. I'm addicted to it. The freedom to walk around town and have somebody smile at you instead of looking at you and turning their face away. At first, I didn't even want to go out and go anywhere. I just kind of sat at home. All because I don't think the same. Talk about evil and where evil comes from and how evil is displayed. This is pretty harsh, but there's been a lot of evil that's been spread my way lately. And I know each one of you could probably stand up here and say the same thing. Whether you were religious or non-religious, just the fact that you say, I don't believe in a God, I'm an agnostic, I'm an atheist, a freethinker, a skeptic, any of those things, you're the devil. I hate to be the one to break it to you, but you and I, we're all in the same boat. We're the devil now. We're the hated ones. Nobody wants to be associated with us. These were the 4 fatal flaws of my faith. Realizing that the Bible isn't real, that religion isn't real, that hell cannot ever in anybody's sadistic mind ever be real, and that evil is a reality. And evil exists, and if God is the one who's responsible for it, or God is the one who's saying, well, my plan is just so grand and some people have to be hurt and others will benefit from their pain. No, can't have any part with that. Why call Him God? It led me to the final step. Faith can't be real. It can't be real. Not in anybody's mind. Not in my mind. And I know because most of you are here. I just couldn't understand. I couldn't make sense of it. So I began this little journey of sorts, living this way. That's me, and that's my bubble. Remember the movie? Any of you old enough to remember the 70s movie, TV, I think it was a kids' TV movie called The Boy in the Plastic Bubble? John Travolta, very young John Travolta starred in it. Yeah, I loved watching that. I thought it was so neat. Well, this is my own personal plastic bubble. Inside that bubble were all the things that I was allowed to think, allowed to listen to, allowed to do, and allowed to read. It's my little Christian bubble. And growing up, we're encouraged to build our own little bubbles because within it is the safety and protection of our minds against all things harmful and evil. Because we all know that the devil roams about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. 1 Peter, for those of you who may not be familiar with where these scriptures are coming from out of my little head, they're coming out of my little red New Testament. So I had this little bubble, but as my 4 fatal flaws began to really come full force to me, I had to start breaking out just a little bit. I had to reach through and try to part the waters, so to speak, pardon the pun, and get a little bit more information. So for the first time ever in my little life, I read something that was not Christian. I don't know if you guys can believe it or not. Bart Ehrman was safe. He was a theologian, is a theologian, and an agnostic. Agnostic is a safer word. So I thought, well, I'll just start reading about what he has to say about the New Testament, what he has to say about Jesus Christ and Scripture, and maybe he can help me with some of these contradiction issues that I'm having. Well, he definitely helped me. Let me just put it that way. I finished several of his books, 4 or 5, I think, in a pretty short period of time. And then I decided I needed something a little bit more scientific. And so I jumped from one extreme to the other and went to Richard Carrier. And then I'm just Googling this stuff, because keep in mind, I don't know who these people are. I've never heard of them. I've never seen their face. Because in my bubble world, they don't exist. They're those outside forces. So I read Richard Carrier and looked into this historicity of Jesus issue, which really kind of, man, if I wasn't already on the downward slope, that would have sent me right over. Then I decided that I would go back and explore Darwin. Now, let me give you just a little backstory on that one. Grew up in very rural South, and when when science class came around, creation was taught, and evolution was just kind of, I don't even remember if the words were even said, honestly. Maybe they were. Maybe one of my teachers will see this and send me an email and say, I taught you that stuff. Well, it definitely wasn't made known. I mean, we believed in creation. 7 literal days, intelligent design, all those things. So I go to college. Remember, I'm called by God, so I go to a Baptist college. And we certainly didn't deal with it there at all. So I knew what evolution theory was because I had studied it to be a good Christian and talk against it. I had to know. At this point, I wanted to read it and take away all the veils of Christian thought, religion, theology, of anything, and just see it for what it was. So I went back and I checked out Mr. Darwin. At that point, I was desperate. In several months, and everything is just kind of, you know how when things start falling in, they just really come one after the other, and it's really quick, and you get overwhelmed really, really fast? Well, that's where I was at. I Googled on the internet one day, clergy who are losing their faith, or clergy who have lost their faith. And this guy named Dan Barker popped up, and this book, Godless. Well, I went and found it on my Amazon, downloaded it on my Kindle, and started reading it, and finished it within just a few hours. I could not put it down. I could not believe that there was someone who was just like me, somewhere out there, who had been through this and had come out on the other side and was still living and breathing. I didn't know Dan Barker. I had no idea who he was. All I knew was he was an ex-preacher, lost his faith, and came out. And he had some kind of group called Freedom from something. I don't remember. Well, I called the contact number at the end and left a message and just didn't say a lot because, remember, I'm still active. This is just a few months ago. And he called me back pretty quickly, and we talked on the phone for a long time. First time I'd ever talked to a human being about any of this. Everything else had gone on right in here. And he shared with me about a group called the Clergy Project. It is, at that time, it had just started. It wasn't even made, nobody knew about it. It was just kind of a secret at that point because honestly, they didn't know if it was going to have any impact or not. They had a suspicion that there were a lot of people like me out there, but nobody really knew. So he and, which I'll talk about that in just a second. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm good at that. But he connected me in with the Clergy Project, and I logged into this Safe House, this online forum for active and former clergy who no longer have a belief in God. And man, I started pouring my heart out on the keyboard in that forum, just talking and finding people who could actually say, yes, we know what you're going through. We're right there with you. We understand. Isn't that the greatest word in the entire English language? 2 words. I understand. I've been there. I understand that. And so I found myself there. And one of the persons that's on the site who is still active, and he's a good friend of mine, suggested that I read one more book from somebody, again, who I had no idea who this person was. So I read The God Delusion. Yeah, some Dawkins dude. I don't know his name. I don't think he's very big in the community. And maybe yeah. I read The God Delusion and thought I had lost my mind. That one took me several days to get through because I had to read it and put it down and go, what the heck did he just say? But it was really another one of those pivotal moments. Reading Dan Barker's book, being online with the fellow clergy persons, and then reading The God Delusion. I mean, it's just a recipe for disaster, you could say. Now, the Clergy Project, before I finish up, I want to just give you a little bit of information. Richard Dawkins and Dan Barker, and then Linda Lascola and Daniel Dennett, these 2 separate groups of people were having some conversations. Dan Dennett and Linda Lascola were part of Tufts University research project that was published in 2010, I believe, on clergy persons, I think it's called Pastors Who No Longer Believe. And they interviewed a select group of active clergy people who had lost their faith just to try to do some research on it, to see if it was prevalent, to see if it existed, what place did it have in the religious culture. Most people are calling our culture post-Christian. They haven't seen many of the political ads lately. I don't know if that's true or not. But they were doing this research. And then Richard Dawkins and Dan Dennett were having conversations. Dan Barker. Dan Barker had been hearing from a lot of people just like me, reading his books and calling or emailing him and saying, hey, this is me. And through these 2 different sets of conversations, they all decided that something needed to be done. There needed to be some type of support system, a support group, basically, for these clergy persons. Not a whole lot of help, but at least something to try and help folks like me who are trying to come to grips with their faith and to come out. So Richard Dawkins Foundation donated the web space and set it up and then just turned it loose. Dan Barker's the only one who's really involved in it because he's the only ex-clergy person. And it's grown since then. I left the statistics at home, they'll kill me. I just got the new stats before I walked over here. It started with 52 people March 2011. And as of a few minutes ago when I was in my hotel room, we just logged on the 270th pastor. Yeah. There's been a lot of activity before anybody really knew it existed. But then after the American Atheist Convention and after the CNN interview and the NPR interviews, it's really, those guys and girls who are screening are working themselves to death trying to get all the applicants through. I think there's about 60 applicants who have yet to be screened because just nobody knew that there were that many out there, that there were that many people who were struggling and trying to find a way out. It's difficult for anyone to come out, but for a clergy person, and I can speak to that because that's where I've just come from, it is difficult. Not only is it the loss of family, the loss of friends, the ostracization in your community, which we all have experienced, but it is a complete way of thinking, way of living, way of acting. I mean, I joked with this couple here when I came in. I had my suit on. I'm all dressed up for church, and I'm going to speak before a group of people. So I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to go up and shake everybody's hand and say, "Hey, I'm so glad you joined us today." You know, I don't know. I have to learn what to do. I have to get some new clothes, I guess. This is my suit I actually preferred to use for weddings and funerals, so special occasions. I know you guys didn't want to know that. So they developed this online safe house for active and former clergy who no longer believe. The no longer believe part is important because we've been accused by a lot of Christian media of being a deconversion unit. No, you have to be kind of deconverted before you come in. We don't want to. I mean, could you imagine somebody who's on the fence and they come in with a whole bunch of preachers? What in the world's going to happen? I mean, really. So we're not a deconversion unit. Again, 265 is the wrong number. It's actually 270. Every denomination, every race, and many religions. Jewish, Muslims, Mormons, Christians, predominantly Christians, but there are, as the media, as the story is getting out across, it's actually going across the world now, we're hearing from people. We have somebody that's from Brazil, and we had to try to struggle to find out who could speak Portuguese, which is not me. Not me. I speak sarcasm and English. That's it. You speak one word of Portuguese? The ultimate, the greatest day, I don't even know how to describe it, is standing at the American Atheist Convention. I had the privilege to step up and to share my story. I was supposed to share my story. It didn't work out that way. To stand before a group of 1,800 atheists, 2,000 atheists or so, more atheists than I ever knew existed, let's just put it that way. To stand up there and to share my own story and to share about the Clergy Project. As I stepped up on the stage and had my notes, I actually took notes with me. I normally don't take anything with me, but I was so terrified. I stood up there and I looked out as I'm looking out at you guys and saw faces that were just like mine. Normal, young, old, somewhere in between, white, black, Asian, Indian, all different people. And they all were just that, people. And I was just struck with guilt. I thought to myself, how many of these people have I hated for so long? And so instead of my notes, the only thing that I felt that I could do in all good conscience was just apologize. And that's what I did. I stood there and said, I apologize for everything, for being the little obnoxious kid in school sitting next to you trying to convert you, for publicly proclaiming that you were devils. I'm sorry to say. I'm now one of you, but that you were immoral, that you had no integrity, no character, that you shouldn't be entrusted with children. I mean, you know the stories. You've probably heard it. It's probably been, hopefully it hasn't been said about you, but the reality is it probably has. So as I shared those things, all the pastors from the Clergy Project just rushed the stage, but someone happened to snap this photo of David Silverman, president of American Atheists, just coming up and giving me the biggest bear hug I think I've ever had. I don't think I could breathe, but it solidifies where I am now. That is the embrace of reason. The embrace of reason. Let me tell you what, it's a lot better place than being in the edge of faith, for me personally. The folks that were at the American Atheist Convention, as I said, I didn't know what to expect from them. As soon as I spoke, they stood on their feet for it seemed like hours, crying, weeping, clapping. Went out into the hallway, still overwhelmed by what had just happened inside. And for about 2 hours, there were people lined up to simply tell me that they loved me. They didn't say, how could you? I can't believe you did this. How dare you stand up and say those things? They said, hey, we're here for you. We're with you. My story is very similar to your story. Let me tell it. Let me share it with you. And we cried together. We laughed together. We took pictures of each other. And it was just one of those special moments, one of those special days. And some of you were there. And even if you weren't, you're here in spirit now, so to speak. And so I thank you, each of you, for just welcoming me 10 weeks. And I couldn't have done it without the support that I've experienced from the Free Thought community. In case you haven't noticed, I'm not Dawkins or Dennett. I'm not Hitchens or Harris. But I have a voice. We all have a voice, and it's time that we use it to stand up, stand out, and to speak out. We can change the world, one mind at a time. When we're brave enough, and it is definitely difficult, but when we're brave enough to stand before our family and friends, and say, hey, I don't believe like you do. I don't think like you do. To risk being hated, which probably will happen, most likely. To risk being excluded from events or, even to be talked about, those little conversations when people are talking in the corner and you walk up and everybody's quiet. They're talking about you. It's worth it. Because we believe in the power of science and history and reason and science. Excuse me, I said science. We believe in it doubly. We believe in science doubly. Free thought. Freedom to think, not an inability to follow. I followed, didn't even realize I could think for so long. And once I was allowed to think, as I said earlier, that was the end of the beginning. And that brings me to where I am here today, standing up, standing out, and speaking out. I want to thank you guys again for letting me come. I do have some brochures for the Clergy Project. If you're interested and you would like some information, they're here on the table. Feel free to take as many as you want. If you happen to have friends that you know that may be struggling, please give them one. The website is clergyproject.org. They can go on and find out all kinds of information. It's really a good group of people, very safe and secure. If they're not clergy and you have friends that are struggling as well, send them over to recoveringfromreligion.org. It is basically the same model. It's just for non-clergy persons. And I think that's all I have. Thank you, Reba. Oh, yeah, definitely.
If you want to ask a question, please come to the mic to do it because we're taping this. And if you just yell it out from the back of the room, you won't be on the tape. So if you want to ask a question, which she's willing to take questions, just come up to the mic to ask it.
Can't resist. This is a room full of people with questions, I know. I have one question, but I also want to make a little statement. And I've realized, I didn't know the word for it, but the hypocrisy of my own church pastor at 14 when I saw him chase some kids, scruffy-looking kids, out of our church gym. And I thought, well, what's wrong with that, And it was in the Vatican at 16 Museum, and all I could think about was the slaves who died to produce all this gold. But with my religious friends, I'm always talking about religion. You'd be wonder I have any friends, but I find we can agree on one thing. I say that if all the people who profess to be Christians acted like one, the world would be a different place. And we can usually smile and stop talking at that point because we really both can really agree on that. But I wanted to ask, how old are your kids? And it's hard to imagine what you've been going through. And when exactly, how old are your kids? Are you really going to stay in that place? And how long ago did you really start thinking about this? When did you get to ask about those conflicts in college? Or were you told to shut up and
Oh, yeah, it was a very fundamentalist Baptist college. There was no questioning. It just never crossed my mind to even, I was a good little girl, like I said. I would never have even thought to say that to anybody. And that continued till last year. I didn't talk to anybody until the Clergy Project came along. I guess 10 years ago when I came into the Methodist Church was when I let the reins go and started thinking. And it took me until last year to allow the pieces of the puzzle to all come together and form one solid object. At that point, I realized, well, I think I'm a Christian agnostic. I know there's a God, and I follow the principles of Christ. And I followed that for a little while, and then I thought, well, no, especially after reading Richard Carrier's book, I decided that I couldn't follow that any longer, but that I believed there was a God, so I was an agnostic. And I participated in the second phase of the La Scola Dennett project, and it was during a conversation that I had with someone that they continued to push the subject, and I realized that I didn't even believe that at all. And that it had actually been that way for a little while, I just didn't know it. But even after thinking those thoughts, I felt guilty again. And so my life, up until the point really when I came out, went like this. I do believe. No, I don't believe. Oh, yes, I can. I can work harder than I believe. No, I don't think I can. I've got to come out. No, I've got to stay in. What am I supposed to do? I mean, it was this total dichotomy in my brain that I just couldn't make any sense of it until just recently. So it's been a long process, and then it's been a short ending, if that makes any sense at all. Did I get every piece?
Kids?
Oh, kids, 22 and 24.
So they're safely away from you.
Yes, one is in El Paso, Texas, and the other is in Kissimmee, Florida. Yeah, yeah. But they think I rock, I guess. I mean, I'm their hero.
Oh,
Yeah. I mean, what more could you ask, you know? Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I actually was over there at that event, and while I was there, I picked up some jewelry, and I've been wearing this piece of jewelry for the last 10 weeks, and people always go, "Oh, what's that A for?"
Yeah.
And all that. And I try not to get too preachy because we don't like
I have
that.
a problem with that. See.
But what I was thinking as I was sitting here, and you were talking about your suit, and that it was your suit that you preach in. Atheists wear those suits too.
Yeah.
But I'm
Oh,
gonna,
really? I didn't know.
I'm actually going to give you this and let you switch your pearls out for this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I can keep, yeah, thank you. The clasp is, these were my mom's pearls. Well, and they have that old-timey, I don't know, either that or I just can't, my fingers are going in middle age too.
This gives you a sense of
there we go.
All right, let's go. You ready? Yes, sir.
Oh, I am an ex-creationist. I was homeschooled, and I kind of had sort of the 4 steps, but sort of different. My linchpin was I discovered chaos theory, and then I realized evolution worked.
Yeah.
And of course, I was taught Darwinian evolution was Lamarckian evolution, so of course it looks stupid. My question is, I've had this. I have a YouTube channel. I've been asked this many times. I've dealt with this several times. Do you ever get a gut emotional reaction, especially for, like, maybe you're wrong now? Like, do you still suffer from hatophobia, from fear of hell? I remember whenever I started looking into our ancestry, our human ancestry, after I left religion around 25-ish probably, I felt like I was looking at child porn. I mean, that's how ingrained and evil Darwin was. I'm wondering. I've discussed it. I've looked at the psychology of it, and I've been able to get it out of my system due to things like self-hypnosis and focused meditation. Also evil things. But I'm wondering, do you still undergo that emotional reaction, the fear? Looking at something that you used to look on as evil and still get that gut reaction, even though you know logically it's absolutely true?
Not so much now. I did last year, especially, and probably even a year or more before that when I was working through it. But I think just the torture of the last year of that continual tug of war back and forth, which really it's a miracle that I'm sane standing before you. Which maybe I'm not, I don't know. But I think that process really let me deal with those things, because I would have those thoughts.
I have a feeling you desensitized yourself because you were so over-emotional. Would that be more of a correct statement?
It could be,
Yeah. Okay.
Could be. Who knows? Who knows?
Teresa, thank you so much. You are very much to be admired. And I just want to ask, I may even cry. I'm just so impressed with your speech. What I'm thinking about is that moment when you decided that you were going to go to that American Atheist Convention. What was it in your mind where you felt like, I'm going to do something this public, after being so, if you will, cloistered for so long?
Yeah,
so.
yeah. That's a very interesting story. I went there and I had the opportunity. It presented itself to me. And I thought about it, and I talked to my husband about it, and I struggled with it, and really wasn't going to do it. And then I guess my rebellious side, the side that liked to listen to rock and roll when I wasn't supposed to, I said, no, I'm going to do it. And the reason I'm going to do it is because I know there are, at that time, 100 Clergy Project people that nobody knows about, that they're suffering in silence, so to speak. And there's an entire group of people whom I met at CFI Orlando, and a group of people that I had been involved or met at Reason Rally and American Atheist that deserved to know the truth and deserved that. I just felt like I needed to share my story, or I thought I was going to share my story, so that there could be more awareness. I just felt that I needed to speak out, and I did. And we got some attention from it. 270 now. That's 170 new members, not just counting applications, since March 26th. So that's a lot of people. Yes, ma'am.
I can't believe I'm doing this, but I just have a question. Have you had any other Christian people treat you decent because of this, you coming out?
Yeah, I have. I had 2 ladies who were members of my church that contacted me immediately and said, hey, we don't understand at all. We can't even imagine how anybody could lose their faith, but we love you, and we don't want to lose a friendship with you. And I've seen them. I've had lunch with them a couple times since. I worked with an Christian addictions and recovery ministry for about 9 years, and played in a band and was the worship leader and, all the stuff that goes with it. And so about 5 people that were in that band with me sent me private Facebook messages and just said, hey, we still love you. We don't care, we still love you. So, yeah, probably, what is that, a half dozen or so people?
Well, the reason I was asking is my husband and I both grew up in a cult, and we were very exclusive, and we came out of that a few years ago, and my in-laws wrote us a letter and cut us off and didn't even go to our daughter's wedding 3 weeks before the wedding.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about all what we've been through is that, for me personally, I still believe in God, but I think the way that a lot of Christians behave is appalling. Because I was talking to a guy here that 2 of his sons were killed in a car accident, and the things that were said to him, it just makes me want to bawl. Because I'm Christian, I would never treat anyone like that.
No.
I would love all you guys no different because of the way you think. To me, if everybody was like that, like you said, we'd be in a much better world.
Yeah, and we could work together to find real solutions to real problems.
Because I think...
I sound like a political candidate just then.
I just wanted to say that, It would never...
I'm sorry, go ahead. I told you I speak sarcasm
I just
well.
wanted to come and just, because my husband feels like you do. We don't even feel, we're not on the same page, but our love is taking over how we feel personally about God. We're not letting that change anything. That's just all I wanted to say.
Well, thank you for sharing. And, my husband is still a believer. If you heard the NPR interview, love will keep us together. I've really got to rein it in, don't I? Y'all are smart folks. I got to be good.
So, I wasn't raised religious, so I had my own little wacky adventure through religion. But I am also a non-believer. So my question is, and I've seen this with a lot of other people that I know who were raised religious and people that I've watched come out of religion since I've been here. Do you feel that sometimes when you're stepping out of your religious role and into like the atheism community and the non-believing community, do you feel like there are some aspects of religious community, like you mentioned earlier, like you're in preacher mode because you're dressed up in your Sunday best,
Yeah.
But are you seeing like religious remnants in the atheist community? And do you feel like some people just kind of trade their religion for a new concept, like not saying that like atheism has become God for them, but like they're, especially the newly non-religious, that they're treating atheism as if it were a new religion, as opposed to just being, oh wait, I don't have to do this anymore.
Yeah.
So do you see that a lot?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's probably natural, especially anytime anything is new. And you get a new car. My husband and I, typically, I just got my car died, so I had to get another car. unemployed and have to get another car. That's a good thing. Well, typically when we get ready to go somewhere, we run out there and he's like, oh, do you want to drive? I'm like, well, I'll drive if you want me to, which means, no, I don't want to drive, you drive. Well, now we have a new car. I'm out there first. Oh, I'll drive. You know, it's the new part of it. And especially when you make a break from religious thought, I think that the relief is so much so that you just kind of have to be an activist for a little while. I mean, R.N. Ra, you guys know? Yes. Yeah. I figured you guys would know. He said that ex-religionists are like ex-smokers. They speak the loudest and debate a lot of times and get on Facebook and post things that you're like, oh my goodness, can I hide this from my newsfeed? But yeah, I think there's some of that. I think it's just they're so free finally to speak their mind, and they do.
Since you mentioned that, did you see this epic debate at the DC rally?
The Reason rally?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
She was writing their videotaping. She's like,
Oh yeah.
That's one of those things she wanted to delete from her.
Yeah. I did.
Hi.
Hi there.
I'm listening to your story, and you're telling my story. So now that when people ask me, well, tell me your story, I'll say this YouTube video right here. Just watch that.
Just watch that?
Yeah, daughter of a Southern Churches of Christ minister.
Yeah.
And now I'm a secular celebrant, so it's interesting. I
Yeah.
don't tell him that I do weddings and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think he'd be real pleased. We were the churches that women can't speak and
Yeah.
lead singing or do any praying, too. So, and I wondered, just now that you're free of all that, do you still? For me, the last thing to go was the mental discussions with God, constantly apologizing for myself, being constantly in prayer, and that was the hardest habit to break, to actually be alone in my own head.
Exactly.
And I wonder if you're still being so new, because it
Yeah.
took me a good few years to knock
kind of
that out.
Okay, I'm glad to know that you can overcome. Driving in my car, I used to drive back and forth from work or to visit somebody, and that would be the time I would spend in prayer. It was quiet, nobody was bothering me, and I caught myself pretty early afterwards driving along going, oh, well, I guess I can't talk to anybody. There's nobody there. What am I supposed to do? Same exact thing. So
I guess it was kind of a mental conditioning.
Yeah,
That to me, looking back, seemed that was hardest to break. And I just wanted to say kudos to your husband for being supportive.
Yeah.
I really admire
he's
that.
great. He's a good guy. I'll keep him.
I found around 5 years, the 5-year mark is when you just don't even notice.
Okay. So he just shared that about the 5-year mark is when we get free from all that stuff. Yes, ma'am.
How long was it between when you finally decided that you were no longer a believer and the time when you stopped preaching?
I want to say a few months. I think in reality it was longer than that, but I was doing this dance of trying to convince myself that I could do it and that I'd have like a great Sunday. The music would be great and I would feel that emotional connection. The message, everything would connect. The points would come across and they would even connect with me. And so I'd leave going, okay, this is good. I can do this. I don't know what this means, but I can do this. And it's kind of like divorce. When a couple realizes that they're in trouble, they typically don't want to deal with it. They just want to ignore it. They go about their daily lives. They continue to grow apart. The change is coming, and everybody that's around knows what's happening, but they just don't want to admit it. And it slowly comes closer and closer to the breaking point. But it almost seems like there goes through these spells where couples I've counseled, they just work harder for a little while, and then it gets worse for a little while, and they work a little bit harder, and then eventually there comes a day where you just can't do it. And for me, that was March 18th. I left and felt like a hypocrite. I was a hypocrite. Felt like I had been deceiving because of my brain. I had been. I actually think my husband told me that after I started going through the process of the last year that my sermons were more scriptural than they'd ever been. But I felt that I needed to be more prepared and more theological and have more doctrine and more scripture because that's the job I took a vow to do. But after March the 18th, after that Sunday, there was no way I could ever do it again. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know how it was going to turn out. I had no idea I was going to stand up in front of the 2,000 atheists and on YouTube and become the most hated woman in Florida. But anyway, thanks for your question. Yes, sir.
Hi. Actually, I was wondering, since this has happened in such a short amount of time for you, and it's been such a short amount of time since you've come out, are there other political and social issues that you found yourself changing that quickly on as well because of your loss of faith?
Man, all these questions that take a lot of time to answer. As I was losing my faith, as I was going through that process, my political agenda changed a lot as well. I was Republican. I campaigned for George Bush. I campaigned for George W. Bush because Bill Clinton was evil and he was of the devil. I can't believe I'm telling you guys this stuff. You promise? It's on tape now. I mean, I've said it. It's out there. I learned my lesson about things being on tape on YouTube. But yeah, those things started to change. Just to give you an idea of really how steeped I was fundamentally in my religion, when we lived in Virginia, I went to abortion clinics and protested. Now, my thoughts have changed greatly since then. Homosexuality. Hey, that was, I hate to say it. I know that there's some of you who are gay or lesbian here, and I 100% love you now. Let me just say that straight up. My brother is gay. He and his partner had a ceremony in New York last year, 11/11/11. And they're very happy. I think they're terrific. I love it. But man, if you'd met me 15 years ago, I'd have been preaching to you. I had my little red Bible. So yeah, politically, especially a lot of issues that are based upon biblical teaching for being, I would have been down there fighting to keep the Ten Commandments in the Courtyard Square in Florida. It's not constitutional, but, faith kind of blinds you to all that sometimes. Anybody else have a question? I think you've got the hardest ones out, so feel free to ask me, what kind of pizza do I like? Do I drink beer? Yes, I like pizza. Yes, I like beer. Oh, and I like cake, chocolate cake. Red wine, chocolate cake.
So where do you want to go from here? Like, what do you hope the future will bring you?
I don't know. It's so fresh and new. I shared with some of the folks this morning that there's so many pieces to the story. I'd worked a temporary job in the Senate in Florida to pay some bills off so that I could come out and at least feel like we'd have at least bacon and eggs for breakfast. I'd applied for a lot of jobs, hundreds really, and I'm not exaggerating. I'm not using the preacher's exaggeration. Had some callbacks, want to talk to me, do some interviews, come back from D.C. and the news. I'm on the news, and everybody verbatim almost said, I just don't think it's going to work out. So my husband has 6 years before retirement, so we are not moving. So at this moment, short term, is I'll continue to travel around and speak to groups, share about the Clergy Project, try to put a little food on the table with speakers' fees, I guess, and I don't know. Maybe God will open a door for me somewhere. I know, I have to do it all myself now. Yes, sir.
I was fascinated by what you said about your two sons. Mm-hmm. So do you mind me asking that personal question? Were they atheists before you, or?
Yeah, my youngest son was, but I didn't know it. We went to see my dad. He came home on leave. He's in the Army in December of this past year, and we drove 6 hours up to my dad's house together to go see him. And I just decided that the time was ripe, that I needed to talk to him and tell him what was going on with me. I don't know what I was expecting. Who knows? I mean, you never know. Well, I shared my story, talked for about 2 hours, and he looked at me, he said, Mom, That's a relief. You know, I've been an atheist for a while. I just couldn't tell you. Since he was probably about 13 or 14, actually. So, my older son hasn't ever had much for religion, and I don't know exactly what he believes. I don't think he does either. So, it just was really a non-issue.
And you never had any problems with your husband. That's great. My wife still clings. She's what I call a secular Christian. And she still clings to it because of family and friends and so forth. But she's kind of drifting over in my direction.
Yeah.
But we never had any discussions or problems or arguments, and apparently you haven't either.
No, we do have some discussions. At first, he didn't want to talk to me about it very much, honestly. But it wasn't because of anything except that it challenged him, and he needed to think through it. He's a guy. You guys understand that. Recently, our conversations have kind of, I don't know, he's in process, I think. He's not been religious for some time, but he's had faith. He was raised Catholic, and so he's held to his faith, but we'll see. I don't know. And if he doesn't, that's fine. As the young lady back there said, that love should be a lot greater than the way people think. And gratefully, that's where he is, and that's where we are.
And by now you know that atheists aren't perfect either.
Right.
And they're really some son of a bitches that are atheists. And no one can speak for all atheists.
Right.
Atheist just means you don't believe in God.
Exactly.
Doesn't mean you're a good person. And I just don't want you to ever get discouraged because you meet a few bad atheists.
Oh, no. I've been in church work my whole life. I can deal with, I mean, seriously.
Yeah, most of us are, I think, I've never met a bad person in this group at all.
Yeah.
People I would trust 100% with anything I had and what they say. So they're just great people, and we admire you.
Thank you.
And we're inspired by you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for the experience. I'm from India. I mean, my accent, I hope people understand. My particular question is that you referred some sort of women-related quotes from Bible, and I believe having such a religious experience in past, you must have insights about what kind of, how women are being dealt by religion and what kind of operation involves in that. I'm particularly working on Hinduism and its religion-based operation of women through cultural customs in India. That's my research topic.
Okay.
So my question precisely is, are you planning to document those insights you have about women in future?
Yeah.
That would be a very helpful contribution.
I have considered that. I have some recordings. I like to talk, obviously. So I have thought about that. I have considered doing either some type of work. Cliff and I were talking earlier about the teachings of Paul and how that, I gave you one example of a contradiction. I could have given you 100 more. So possibly doing that or looking at women. I know Annie Laurie Gaylor with Freedom from Religion Foundation has a work that she did that deals with the oppression of women in religion. So it's possible. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's what my future holds. We'll see.